Yeah, just a couple of comments and a couple of questions to the author here. Presentations by local residents and South Coast Air Quality Management District officials got my attention, but I wanted to ask you personally, because I'm sort of with Hannah-Beth Jackson on this, and we're going to hear this bill twice, whether we, if it passes this committee. I'm questioning my sanity on that. So if there is no net loss of fire rings, and assuming the facts are correct, there doesn't seem to be any deterrent to public access, and there's still 765 fire rings, but since March, some of them have been switched from wood to charcoal, which is cleaner burning fuel. What's wrong with that? Other than s'mores are better over wood? I mean, that seems that public health trade-off is important to me, because I was a coastal commissioner. I really support public access. I'm also a huge advocate, as you know, on access to clean air. I think the locals have some issue. The process is a whole different problem that I'll just put aside for the minute. So why are we sort of, no pun intending, drawing this line in the sand where people can't work together and figure this out?
Thank you very much. I really appreciate that. I think it's due to some factual inaccuracies that were just presented. There has been no respacing of fire rings, as Dr. Wallerstein presented. If they were to be respaced, these fire rings would be in the water in Newport Beach. That was really what the whole controversy started over, was this would eliminate a lot of fire rings in Orange County. So there has not been spacing of fire rings. And this bill,
if there were, at the end of the day, still the same number of fire rings and they were respaced, that you're fine with that?
Yeah, I mean, if we can preserve, the number of fire rings and the access to those fire rings, that's really the objective here. And that's,
do you care if they're charcoal or wood, personally?
That's not the biggest issue to me. The biggest issue is
I know you need permits. I mean, I know it's more complicated than that.
Thanks, sir.
But one of the issues in the Coastal Commission letter is somehow was the deterrent switching to charcoal. I don't get that, but if that's factually correct or not, I'm trying to figure out what is exactly where some common ground here is on this. Not particularly for this committee, because our challenge here in the Senate is the Assembly sort of had the good fortune in natural resources jurisdiction on air quality and the Coastal Act, but in the Senate, this committee does air quality. Natural resources jurisdiction is the Coastal Act. So we find ourselves actually very concerned about air quality, and that's the purview of this committee. So I need to walk through what is the problem and how could you accomplish your objective. I am not interested in restricting, undermining the authority of either agency, South Coast or the Coastal Commission. So I'd like to hear from you. Where is this?
Super. And I'll also have Sarah Christie, the Coastal Commission, also answer if I could. First is that, if these were to be spaced underneath the original Rule 44 plan, as I mentioned, we'd be losing beach bonfire rings. We have accepted and worked with the committee on amendments, and in this committee and many others, and taken those amendments to say that what this would do is not make Rule 444 null and void, as a lot of the testimony we just heard actually related to. So much of the testimony we just heard was saying, look, we like Rule 44, we want it to stay in place, and this bill would make that null and void. But that's simply not the case. What this bill does is it simply harmonizes the jurisdiction of the Coastal Commission and the AQMD. So I think that, if you balance out what we've heard and realize that many of the statements that were made to a previous version, an unamended version of this bill. And now that we have accepted those amendments, they no longer apply. And because the spacing has not occurred, were the spacing to occur, yes, we would be losing access.
But argumentatively, couldn't the fire pits that are relatively close to homes with whatever the health limit requires be in charcoal? Isn't there some way to solve this?
And I'll defer to Ms. Christie of the Coastal Commission.
Senator Pavley, your questions perfectly illustrate why this issue needs to be the subject of a fully noticed public hearing before the Coastal Commission for a coastal development permit to implement 444. I think it's important to sort of tone down the rhetoric that we heard in some of the testimony about and talk about what this bill really does. I have to reiterate, this bill does not affect Rule 444 at all. Rule 444 does not ban the burning of wood. If the legislature or the South Coast AQMD wants to ban the burning of wood, then a separate action needs to be taken to address that. But as Rule 444 was written and approved, it does not prohibit the burning of wood. So, as I said earlier, there are a number of ways to implement Rule 444. Some of those ways are consistent with the Coastal Act, and some of those ways are not consistent with the Coastal Act. The city's first response was to eliminate all the fire rings. That's clearly inconsistent with the Coastal Act. Their second response was to propose to eliminate half the fire rings. That's also inconsistent with the Coastal Act. Their current position is to restrict the fuel use to charcoal only. The Coastal Commission has met with the city. We've written to the city. We've been in frequent communication with the city about the fact that this requires a coastal development permit as well.
And I want to raise that question.
Okay.
I don't get that.
Okay.
I just don't get that.
Okay.
Why switching from charcoal to wood or vice versa requires an official permit if it doesn't deter public access, which I think is the jurisdiction of the Coastal Commission. And if it's cleaner air and everyone seems to enjoy it equally, what is the point?
Well, and I'm happy to address that now if you like, or we can discuss that further in the Natural Resources Committee, which will be talking about the Public Resources Code section of this bill, at your preference.
I'd like a brief reaction to that now.
Happy to do that.
I don't really want to go through this again.
So the benefit of the fire rings specifically is that they are a low-cost, visitor-serving recreational opportunity.
Versus charcoal.
That is how we define the fire rings. They are a low-cost, visitor-serving recreational opportunity, which is a protected activity under the Coastal Act. They predate the Coastal Act, and they are protected by the Chapter 3 policies of the Coastal Act pertaining to public access and low-cost, visitor-serving recreation. The charcoal-only requirement that the city has passed changes the dynamic of that, in that in order to have a bonfire of any size in those fire rings, which are fairly large, I think they're about 3.5 to 4 feet across, right, you need a very large amount of charcoal. So when you buy a bag of charcoal at the store to cook or grill at home, you might use half the bag. But in order to build a bonfire of any size, you need to have several bags, and that gets quite expensive. The second aspect of that is that we've actually done some side-by-side tests of wood versus fire, and we've taken very specific notes about the length of burn, the amount of heat, and the size of the flame. And clearly, a charcoal fire is not equivalent to a wood bonfire. So from a cooking perspective, if you're cooking s'mores or grilling steaks, charcoal works fine. But for a recreational experience, from a recreational perspective, which is what these fire rings provide, charcoal is a diminished experience. Now, that's not to say that there's not a place for some charcoal-only rings on the beach. There are people who you've heard are sensitive to wood smoke. It might make sense to have the fire rings that are closest to the homes be charcoal only. But the only way we're going to have an opportunity to look at this question holistically and talk about where does it make sense to have charcoal fire rings, where does it make sense to have wood fire rings, and where does it make sense to have a pilot project that looks at other clean-burning fuels. The only way to have that kind of comprehensive, holistic discussion that includes the public is through the Coastal Commission's CDP application process.
Okay. Well, we're here today, and we may be in another hearing in a little bit. That hearing process isn't about to occur. We're here because there's legislation, and there will, this will be resolved maybe legislatively, and I don't think that's your best answer.
This legislation will ensure that CDP application process before the Coastal Commission will occur, because it hasn't occurred yet. Despite our multiple efforts to make that happen, it hasn't happened. This bill will provide the explicit direction that needs to take place, and that, quite frankly, is value added at this point.
Well, sort of the overall sort of ongoing issues, we're a lot more sophisticated and knowledgeable about smoke and how it impacts public health. Just traditionally, because something's always been done, doesn't mean we should always continue it if there's information that makes that relevant. So close proximity to homes is relevant, and I think there needs to be some acknowledgement of that. So we're in the EQ committee, and so that's what this is about. In the meantime, I've said to both Mr. Wallerstein, and I've said it to you, Ms. Christie, we just shouldn't be up here in this role picking between different agencies. It seems sort of a little bit convoluted to me. I understand process that we can't figure out impacts to public health if they're real, and no one's challenging AQMD on that they don't have jurisdiction or expertise on health impacts. I think that's relevant.
Thank you, Senator Pavley. Senator Jackson?
Quick question. Could we have Mr. Wallerstein come back here? I have one question that could hopefully resolve this whole thing.
As someone with asthma.
And the question is there any reason why you would not agree to sit down with the Coastal Commission and set up a time to have a hearing on this issue? Because it sounds like there's a lot of merit to your position. And if we could get you have a hearing, that's what I think you want. You want to be able to I don't think, from what I heard, although maybe I'm wrong because we had a disagreement about exposure to wood and what it means, I think it has a significant impact. I don't think people should have to breathe that stuff with the health hazards associated with it. That being said, is there any reason that you could not notice a public hearing or have the Coastal Commission notice a public hearing where this issue is discussed and that there's a resolution that acknowledges that you have a place in at this table, and does the Coastal Commission? I think that's what's frustrating me.
Senator Jackson, if I could, and it's frustrating me as well.
Could we get an answer?
Discussion.
I'd like to see a commitment here at this time to sit down and resolve this.
If I say, my understanding of their process is there is no hearing part of there's no hearing requirement, nor he's had his hearings for his rule. The issue to me is they need to sit down and come to an understanding and avoid this. But please.
So, as I listen to the discussion here, I'm again wondering why we are here with this bill, because the issue is really between the Coastal Commission and the city of Newport Beach. And I would like to share with you that yesterday I called the city manager of Newport Beach, and I said, if the senators were to hold the bill and direct us all to sit down in a room and work this out, are you up for that? And the answer was yes, absolutely.
And respectfully, if I may, as the author,
would you like to close?
I would love to close. Thank you very much. On behalf of all Californians, I'd like to close, and I'd like to hopefully provide some clarity to these big questions that are coming up before us. And Senator Jackson, I'd love to directly address your point. This bill came to me when I was sitting in my chair, and my Capitol director came up to me and said, "Did you hear they're trying to get rid of all the beach bonfires in Southern California?" And I just kind of laughed, and I said, "You got to be kidding. Who'd want to do something like that?" And it has evolved into a big fight about air quality. But that's not where it started. Where this all started, to be very clear, is there is a very small neighborhood, a very wealthy neighborhood in Newport Beach that didn't like a lot of inlanders or people that didn't live in the area coming in, parking in their neighborhood, parking in the public parking, enjoying the beach bonfires, enjoying the beach. They just didn't like them there. And a lot of the thinking, according to much of the testimony that had been heard in many forums, was they didn't like the out-of-towners using their beach. And that's where it all started. And they tried many things, noise, nuisance, violations, all these things, and eventually it morphed into an air quality issue. And the fact now that we're talking about air quality is fine. This is wonderful, because I think that's one of the great things about living in California is, as was mentioned, we don't have cigarette smoking in a lot of public places, and that's wonderful. As a reformed smoker myself, I love it. I have nice, clean lungs, I think, and I think that's something we should all aspire to. But as it relates to beach bonfires, this is an access issue. I live in Huntington Beach. I've been a Southern California native my whole life. I've lived in Huntington Beach for 20 years, and I'm a surfer. I was down on the beach all weekend this weekend. And I can tell you that.
You're supposed to say that. You were out working.
No, I was also walking precincts, but I was going to leave that out of this particular policy conference
we were all working.
committee. But the point is this, is that when you go down to the beach, it's the great equalizer, right? Everybody comes down. And it's not like Disneyland or all of our other wonderful Southern California attractions that bring tourists from all over. They have a big entry fee sometimes at many of these attractions, and yes, they're reasonable for the value provided, et cetera. We love our attractions, but the bottom line is you come to the beach and you can park for free on most of the city streets, or maybe pay $15 in a city lot or something like that. Other than that, you come on down to the beach, you provide whatever your, whether it's charcoal or wood or whatever else, and that's it. You buy your s'mores and your hot dogs, and you get to have an activity that's enjoyed by all, whether you're a multimillionaire or you're unemployed. Doesn't matter. And they come from all California, and they love it, and they enjoy it, and that's what this is about. But now it has evolved into a discussion over air quality. And with me, that's totally fine. The difficulty that you have mentioned, which is, hey, wait a second, we've got the AQMD here with a ruling. They're trying to keep our air clean. Thank you. And the Coastal Commission, they're trying to keep the beach open to all Californians so we can enjoy an irreplaceable, inexpensive, iconic California activity. Thank you. And my mother, Senator Pavley, as you well know, was also a Coastal Commissioner.
Yes, Penny.
Yes, Penny Allen. And she was a chair of the California Coastal Conservancy for 12 years as well. So I grew up in a family that understands these issues, and these were my dinner table conversations. The point is this is actually our forum to have this conversation take place. And when this committee passes this bill on to the next committee, that actually ensures that these parties get to come together and have that conversation, because to date they've not had that conversation, despite my best efforts to make that conversation take place. So with all due respect to everyone here in the room, and thank you very much for the patience of everyone that's had to listen to this, and not only the patience, but I think this process is great because it brings to light all of the various issues, and this might be one of the only forums where we can actually bring the parties together and allow them to discuss this. So by moving the bill today, by moving on to the next committee, it actually ensures, as you mentioned in your previous testimony, that conversation does take place. So with that, I respectfully ask to pass AB 1102 on to the next committee so we can make sure that discussion does take place.
Thank you, Assemblymember Allen. I appreciate the close. And one thing for clarification, if the bill does move forward, will you accept all of the amendments, including those in declarations and findings?
If we'd mentioned previously, we prefer to keep the findings in, and really, just to be clear, the findings just related back to the legislation I did last year, which was when the issue first came up. I just wanted the legislature to get together and say we want to keep our beach bonfires because we value them as a California tradition, and everyone agreed in both houses, passed unanimously out, tons of co-authors, and that's why I think that was Ledge Council put that in the findings, that it was the intent, to keep our beach bonfires. If that is what's holding it up in committee today, I'm happy to accept that. That's fine. Just to proceed, with conversation, so we can move on and make sure these parties do come to the table.
Okay, thank you. Did you want to say something, Senator? I thought.
In my absence, through at least half of the conversation, I did want to just express some concerns, and I think your close, Assemblyman, really frames and focuses the debate very clearly for us, so thank you for that. I also appreciate your taking the amendments. So, for all your reasons stated, I also have a concern with just the local control issue, that I don't know that a one-size-fits-all for California. There are different issues going on in different parts of the state. I'm authoring at least one or two bills that have to do with local issues and asking my colleagues to be respectful of what's going on in the local district. So I don't know that we need to get drawn into everything. But one of the most compelling pieces of information I heard today was from the Air Quality Management District that attendance is not down, that it seems to be working. So that raises the question, is there even a need for the bill? I will support letting the bill move for the reasons that you've just said, with confidence that things will be in good hands in the next committee. But I'd like to believe that, in fact, because I do have concern, real concern, as do you, for the air quality issues, that people will come to the beach, people will use the beach, because there is that innate desire to do so, have their fires, and use other than coal, other than wood as the fuel. So it seems like that's happening now. Raises questions why we need the bill. That notwithstanding, I think that's probably where we want to get to finally. So there's access, there's respect for the health issues, and everyone can live in harmony.
Thank you, Senator Lynn. Senator Gaines?
Yes, mine was just as some of the points that were brought up by Ms. Christie in terms of the experience of a wood-burning fire. And I guess my question is, could there be a compromise position that would look at charcoal in proximity to people's homes and fire in other areas of the beach? And so I'm just throwing that out.
And Senator Gaines, absolutely, this should be part of the conversation. And this, as we just mentioned, I think this really is the value of making sure that the conversation continues by passing this bill on to the next committee, because that really ensures that we get a chance to have that conversation. And I do look forward to that, because I think the points raised were excellent points. I mean, I realize that this might have started out as an issue with a wealthy neighborhood that didn't want out-of-towners on their beach, right? Californians on their beach. But it has brought in some much larger issues, because we do have some densely populated areas. And I'm very respectful of that. And I would like to make sure that conversation does take place. So
Great, thank you.
Did you want to make a comment to this?
I was just
letting everyone.
I was just going to respond that the way you suggested, Senator, is actually what is happening with implementation today.
Let me clarify. There is not a ban of wood burning?
Relative to wood burning, there is not a ban of wood burning. You can either spread your fire pits out, or if you're more than 700 feet from the nearest residence, you can burn wood without spreading your fire pits out. If you're within the 700 feet, then you just simply need to spread them out, and you could burn wood.
Okay, does that apply to the beaches discussed, though? Because I was told, I thought the explanation was that there wasn't 700 feet.
In the city of Newport Beach, the distance is much less than 700 feet, and they elected to require charcoal because it burns cleaner, and they thought that was preferable to spreading them out, because you might impact different residents, and then they'd have a whole nother set of concerns in City Hall.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you.
Last comment, and just that it would be a lot easier if the city of Newport Beach had a local coastal plan.
Very true. Thank you for the discussion, and thank you, and Assemblymember Allen, thank you for bringing this conversation to light, because it really highlights for me a number of things. One, certainly is the relationships between the Coastal Commission and perhaps communities around the state, and certainly with the Air District as well, and in trying to balance those and harmonize, which is a word we've been using, those conflicting and sometimes conflicting, but at the end of the day, we're working for all of California. As I look at the issue, and I've been struggling, and thank you for taking the amendments, I will not be supporting the bill today. I was thinking of doing that, was looking at it, but the more I've struggled over the last few days, it has been, what is the purpose of the bill? And that has been the difficulty for me, because we've made certainly the intent initially was going one direction, and that direction would have placed the Coastal Commission over air quality considerations in the valley, in the basin, or in Newport and in the areas that we're talking about. I certainly couldn't support that, because the Coastal Act clearly says air concerns are related to air district and around the state, and so we wanted to make sure that we could come up with something that worked. But then the more we worked on it, the more we came to the conclusion that the law is, as it stands today, requires the harmonization of these agencies. It requires that the air district comes up with a bill or a rule in this particular case, and if the city of Newport Beach decides to abide by it or doesn't abide by it, if they don't abide by that rule, then there are enforcement actions against the city that the air district can apply. If they abide by it, but at the same time they affect the Coastal Commission by their actions and whatever they do, which sounds like, according to the Coastal Commission, that they are diminishing the experience, which I have a hard time understanding, that charcoal is diminishing the experience of a fire when I see the pictures in here. But that's their decision, and that's up to them to make that call. But if the city of Newport Beach decides to change that configuration and they feel they don't need a coastal development permit for that, and they choose not to go forward with that, which is what they may be doing at this point in time, then it's up to the Coastal Commission to enforce action on them. At the end of the day, there'll be harmony at one point or another. The sad part is that we've not given the Coastal Commission the ability to enforce these actions without taking a year-long legal effort to do that. And we need to change that here, because it's important that they have equal standing in terms of, and I know that's not a legal term, Senator Jackson, that I'm using it, but they have legal standing to at least enforce the rules that in the laws and the act as they see it. But to me, this is working. It's working fine. And if the Coastal Commission does not agree with that, then they can go after the city of Newport Beach to make changes to it. The Air District, I think, did the right thing, and I believe that in looking at the requirements of Rule 444 and the way that it has been mitigated, the air quality concerns and the PM, has been a very balanced approach to it, not losing one fire ring in the area and on the beach. So I think that, and since this is my only opportunity to vote on this bill, I don't have the privilege of Senator Pavley or Senator Jackson. If it moves forward, I'm going to have to vote no on it today because of that. I think that what we need to see is a working relationship, and frankly, the coast of California touches all of us in one form or another. But I don't want to say, and I apologize for this, Ms. Christie, but there's a pettiness that I see, and that I'm hearing from, and a lack of working closely together with the communities to protect all of us, and especially protect our coast. And do we protect the coast by, is access the real issue of charcoal versus wood? And anyone who has any familiarity with air quality knows that what can be in that wood that's being burned, regardless, I mean, unless you're taking it right off of the tree and drying it and burning it, there's something in that wood that's probably not going to be good for you to breathe at some point in time, besides the particulate. But it's what that, perhaps the pallet that was cut up to be used on there, which is probably covered with every chemical you could think of, and that person is breathing that. So I think the intention of this bill was great, and I think you've achieved the goal. I honestly think you've achieved the goal. The goal is to allow for the fire rings, and the Air District has created the opportunity, and the city has worked closely to create that, and I, at this point, don't see the need for the bill, so I will not be supporting it. Is there a motion? Senator Jackson, we have a motion? As amended. Thank you.
Item 2, AB 1102 by Assemblymember Allen. The motion is due pass as amended and re-refer to Committee on Natural Resources and Water. Senators Hill?
No.
Hill, no. Gaines? Aye. Gaines, aye. Fuller? Hancock? Jackson? Aye. Jackson, aye. Leno? Aye. Leno, aye. Pavley? Aye. Pavley, aye. 4-1.
4-1, that bill is on call, and we'll hold the roll open until for the absent members. Thank you.
Thank you all very much.
Senator Hill?
Yes.
I thought certainly appropriate because you chair EQ to vote no, because that you share my issues. I have to be at a meeting with the Senate Pro Tem for a while. May I come back and add on if needed?
Of course, and you do have enough votes, by the way, to get the bill out, but we'll hold the roll open. I didn't fail to mention that. I'm sorry.
Thank you. I'd just like to thank everyone on the committee for this robust conversation, and I know that by moving it, we can have conversations. Thank you all very much.
Thank you very much.